William Yates smelled trouble before he read the letter, the way he could smell water 3 fathoms down before his auger ever bit into wet clay. It was in the wax, a green bronze seal pressed with a small stamped weight symbol he did not recognize, sitting on top of a stack of contract papers that a runner had left at his lodgings while he was out finishing the Hollies well. He broke the seal standing in the doorway of the boarding house, boots still crusted with red mud, and read it twice before he understood what it meant. It was not a threat. It was the opposite of a threat, which was somehow more unsettling. The letter informed him, in the clipped formal hand of the Kestrel's Crossing Waitsworn office, that a dispute lodged against him by the trader Corvin Ash regarding the Hollies well contract had been reviewed and dismissed, the original terms upheld, and that Ash had been formally warned for a second time that season regarding inconsistent measure. It was signed only with initials, B.M., Southern Post. William sat down on the boarding house step and read it a third time. He knew that hand. He had 30 letters from that hand tucked in a strongbox under his cot, going back the better part of a year, each one answering some question he had about Crossroads law, or warning him gently that a certain trader's weights ran light before the man had even tried to cheat him, or simply confirming, in that dry and careful way, that a spoken contract he'd made over a handshake was binding under Crossroads custom whether or not it was written down. He had thought this whole time that B.M. of the Southern Post was a clerk doing a clerk's job, careful, fair, a little cold on the page, which he'd come to find oddly comforting. He had never once considered that this correspondent had been quietly standing between him and ruin 3 separate times in the last 8 months, catching a shorted measure here, a false clause there, before it ever reached him as a problem he had to solve. He looked at the initials again. B.M. he had never asked. It had not seemed the sort of thing you asked a stranger who wrote you clean, useful letters and nothing else. Tomas Reeve found him still sitting on the step an hour later, boots unlaced, letter in his lap. "You look like a man who found out his own dog has been herding his sheep without him asking," Tomas said, dropping down beside him with a grunt. Tomas hauled goods for 3 different caravan companies and had opinions about everyone at the Crossroads, most of them uncharitable, several of them accurate. "Something like that," William said. He held up the letter. "Ash tried to shave the Hollies' payment again. Somebody at the Waitsworn office caught it before it ever got to me. 3rd time this year." Tomas whistled low. "You've got a guardian angel with a ledger then." "I've got a stranger," William said, "who apparently thinks it's her business to keep Corvin Ash honest on my account, and I don't even know why." "Only one way to find that out," Tomas said, and clapped him on the shoulder hard enough to make him cough. The Waitsworn office at Kestrel's Crossing sat at the southern edge of the market square, where 3 trade roads met beneath the long shadow of the Cairn Mountains, and where wagons from the desert routes, the river valleys, and the high steppe all converged in a permanent, restless tangle of canvas and dust and shouted prices. It was not a grand building. It was a low stone hall with a slate roof, its door flanked by 2 carved posts notched from top to bottom with hundreds of tiny marks, a record of every dispute settled within, going back longer than William had been alive. He had walked past it 100 times without going in, because his letters always came by runner and he had never had cause. Now he stood in front of the door with the folded paper in his coat and found himself unaccountably nervous, the way he sometimes was standing over a new well site before the first strike, not knowing yet whether the ground would give him clean water or nothing at all. Inside, the hall smelled of cedar oil and old parchment. A young human clerk looked up from a table stacked with witness staves and pointed him, without much interest, toward a curtained alcove at the back where the Southern Post handled its business. William pushed through the curtain and stopped. The woman behind the table was an orc, and she was extraordinary in a way that made the room feel smaller. She sat with the straight-backed ease of someone who had spent years learning that stillness was its own kind of strength, dark green skin, catching the lamplight along the strong line of her jaw. Black hair, pulled back in thick braids threaded through with dozens of small brass weight tokens that clicked softly whenever she moved her head, one for every contract she had sealed since she had taken up this post. She wore a fitted leather bodice the color of dark tea, laced snug over a cream linen shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow to show forearms roped with old scars pale against her skin, and a woven sash in the office's bronze and green crossed at her hip, marking her rank. She was not young, not old, somewhere in the strong middle of her years, and she looked at him with an attention so complete it felt almost physical. "You're the well digger," she said, before he had said a word. Her voice was low, unhurried, faintly amused in a way that suggested she rarely showed it. "William Yates." "I am," he said, "and you're B.M. Bagrak Mudbourne." She set down the stylus she'd been using to notch a witness stave and folded her hands. "You got my letter. I got 3 of your letters over the better part of a year, and I only just worked out that all 3 of them were you, and that you've been keeping Corvin Ash's hand out of my pocket the whole time." He heard himself sound more accusing than he meant to and softened it. "I came to say thank you, and to ask why." Something crossed her face, quick and controlled, gone before he could name it. She studied him a moment longer than the question required, as though she were looking for something specific in his features, and had not yet decided whether she'd found it. "Ash runs light weights," she said finally. "It is my duty to catch that, whoever it happens to. That's not an answer to why me 3 times when I know for a fact he's cheated half the traders on the Southern Road and you didn't write letters to any of them." "No," she agreed. "I did not." She did not explain further, and something in her stillness told him that pressing would get him nothing today. He let it go, filed it away the way he filed away the first sign of clay before he hit the water table, certain there was more beneath it, willing to wait for the dig. "Well," he said, "thank you regardless. I don't suppose the Southern Post takes visitors who aren't in dispute with anyone." That earned him the ghost of something that was almost a smile quickly reined in. "The Southern Post takes anyone with sense enough to keep good records," she said. "You write a decent contract, Yates, for a man who digs holes for a living. High praise from a woman who reads them for a living. Do not let it go to your head." He left the office lighter than he had entered it, and it was 3 streets away before he realized he had been smiling the whole time without meaning to, and that some small, stubborn part of him had already decided he would find a reason to come back. Kestrel's Crossing did not belong to anyone, which was both its charm and its constant low-grade friction. Human traders from the river towns haggled beside orc drovers down from the Carn-Hold pastures. Desert caravanners in wide striped cloth argued prices with steppe riders in felted wool, and all of it was held together, loosely and imperfectly, by a shared understanding that a spoken bargain here was as binding as a written one, sealed with a witness mark on a stave that both parties kept half of, broken only at the cost of a reputation nobody could afford to lose. It worked mostly because the Waitsworn office made it work, and the Waitsworn office worked mostly because orcs like Bagrak Mudbourne had built their whole culture around the idea that an oath spoken aloud was heavier than any stone. Not everyone loved that arrangement. William heard it plainly enough from Tomas Reeve over supper that evening at the Crossing Post Inn, a low stone building thick with wood smoke and the smell of river fish frying in butter. "Some of the grain men don't like an orc holding the scales over human business," Tomas said around a mouthful of bread. "Ash complains about it loud enough. Says it isn't natural for a people who fought us in our father's time to sit in judgment on our contracts now." "Ash complains because he gets caught," William said. "That's true enough, but he's not the only one grumbling, and it isn't only human grumbling either. I've heard some of the Carn-Hold folk say a Waitsworn ought to keep her distance from the humans she judges. There's an old one, Kolskar, runs livestock appraisal on the north side, spits every time your Mudbourne's name comes up. Says she's gone soft trading fists for paperwork." "She's not my Mudbourne," William said, and felt his own ears go warm at how quickly he'd needed to say it. Tomas grinned at him over the rim of his cup and said nothing else. which was somehow worse. He went back to the Waitsworn office 3 days later with a genuine reason this time. A contract dispute over a well he'd dug for a step caravan that had tried to pay him in half-weight silver, and found Bagrek exactly where he'd left her. Sleeves rolled, brass tokens clicking as she bent over a witness stave with a small curved knife, notching it with quick, precise strokes. "You again," she said without looking up. "Me again. I've got an actual dispute this time, so you don't have to make one up to see me." That got him a proper look, dark eyes narrowing with something that might have been warning or might have been interest, hard to say which with her. "I did not make anything up, Yates." "No," he admitted, dragging a stool up to her table without being asked, which earned him a raised brow he chose to ignore. "You just decided 3 separate times that a well-digger you'd never met was worth defending from a man everyone in this square is afraid to cross. That's not nothing, whatever it is." She set down the knife. For a moment she looked at him the way she had that first day, searching, careful, weighing something he couldn't see the scale of. Then she reached for his contract instead, all business again. "Let me see the silver," she said. He learned over the following weeks that this was how she worked: deflect the personal, attend to the practical, and somewhere in the practical, without either of them quite naming it, let the personal in anyway. She weighed his silver and found it short by a hair, enough to matter under Crossroads law, and made the caravan master pay the difference in front of witnesses without raising her voice once. She asked him afterward, entirely without preamble, how a man learned to find water underground, and listened to his answer about clay seams and the smell of wet stone with an attention that made him talk longer than he meant to. He asked her, in turn, how a woman became a Waitsworn, and got only that she had trained under an elder named Grosh Ironquill, and that the work suited her better than she had expected, which told him there was a longer story folded up small behind it. They began meeting on purpose rather than by accident. He would bring her a contract to review even when he was fairly sure it was sound, because it gave him a reason to sit across the table from her while she read, her lips moving slightly over the harder clauses, brass tokens swaying against her jaw. She would send a runner to tell him when a new caravan was in with fair prices on rope and pulley chain, which had nothing to do with her duties and everything, he began to suspect, to do with wanting an excuse to be told he'd noticed. Once, reaching across the table for the same stylus, their hands brushed, and neither of them moved for a full breath longer than the moment required, and neither of them mentioned it after. The whole Crossroads noticed before either of them admitted it to themselves. Tomas Reeves started making a show of finding urgent business elsewhere whenever William mentioned the Waitsworn office. The young clerk at the front desk began greeting William by name before he'd even reached the curtain. And Corvin Ash, watching from across the square with his soft merchant's hands folded and his eyes narrow, began to smile in a way that had nothing to do with good humor at all. The harvest muster came at the turn of the season, when every trade road converged on Kestrel's crossing at once and the market swelled into a proper fair. Banners strung between wagon poles, drums and pipes competing with the auctioneers, and at the center of it, on packed earth ringed by hay bales, the stone reckoning. It was an old Crossroads tradition, older than either humans or orcs cared to fully claim credit for. 2 great iron-bound stone anchors set 40 paces apart, a length of thick rope between them, and any 2 people with coin to enter and pride to spend could grapple for the win, hauling the rope hand over hand until one anchor crossed the center line. The prize this season was the exclusive well-servicing contract for the entire autumn caravan circuit, 6 months of guaranteed work worth more coin than William would otherwise see in a year, and enough prestige besides that half the tradesmen at the Crossroads had put their names in the lot barrel. He had entered for the coin, plainly and honestly. He was strong from years of digging, knew how to find leverage in his hips, and his heels the way most brawlers only knew how to find it in their arms, and he liked his odds. He had not expected his name to be drawn against Bagrek Mudbournes. The crowd certainly had not expected it. A murmur went through the hay bale ring the moment the lot caller read both names aloud, and William watched it ripple outward in two directions at once. Human traders leaning together with sharp, interested grins, already laying side wagers on whether the well-digger could take the champion, and a knot of orc onlookers near the north side going very quiet, very still, Ushna Kolskar among them with her arms crossed and her jaw set like a woman watching an insult unfold in slow motion. Bagrak found him beside the anchor stone, checking the rope's fray with the same careful attention she gave a contract clause. "You did not have to enter this bracket," she said quietly. "Didn't know you'd entered until they read the names. I entered because Kolskar has spent a year telling anyone who will listen that I have gone soft. I intend to remind her otherwise." She glanced at him, something wry and warm flickering at the corner of her mouth. "I did not intend to remind her by breaking the fingers of a man I happen to like." "You like me," he said, delighted despite the circumstances. "Do not make me regret saying it before the match, Yates." The horn sounded, and the crowd's noise rose to a wall of sound. And for a long minute the world narrowed to the rope burning through William's palms and the raw, muscled pull of Bagrak's arms, braid tokens clicking violently with every heave. She was stronger than he was by a wide margin, and he had known that walking in. But he had spent his whole working life learning how weight moved through earth and stone and rope. And halfway through the pull he found the angle he needed, planted his heel against the packed ground, and felt the rope shudder toward his side of the line. He had her. He knew it in his shoulders before his mind caught up. A half-second of pure certainty that if he threw his weight back now, dug his heels in and pulled, the anchor would cross, and the contract would be his and Bagrak Mudbourne, retired champion of some arena he still knew nothing about, would lose in front of the whole crossroads to a human she had chosen, publicly, to grapple with. He looked past her shoulder, in that half-second, and saw Ushna Kolskar's face, already curdling with something ugly and ready, saw the human trader's grins sharpening into something that would not stay good-natured if he won, saw exactly what Corvin Ash would make of an orc champion beaten in the mud by the very well-digger she'd been protecting for a year. It would not be a story about strength. It would be a story about how even their best could be brought low, and every human who wanted an excuse to distrust a Waitsworn's fairness would have one gift-wrapped in public. He let go of the tension in his heels. It was such a small thing, a fraction of a shift in his weight, nothing the crowd could see, but Bagrak felt it instantly, the way any fighter feels an opponent stop fighting. The anchor lurched her way and crossed the line, and the crowd roared, and she stood there gripping the rope with her chest heaving, staring at him with an expression that had nothing to do with victory in it at all. She found him afterward behind the hay bales, out of the crowd's sight, still breathing hard, sweat darkening the collar of her shirt. "You had it," she said. "It was not a question. I felt you have it, and then you gave it back to me." "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, which was such an obvious lie that she almost laughed, a short, surprised sound quickly swallowed. "Do not insult me twice in one afternoon, Yates." He looked at his hands, rope burned, and then at her, flushed and furious and magnificent, and decided the truth was easier than the lie anyway. "I looked at Kolskar's face. I looked at what Ash would do with it. And I thought, the contract's good coin, but it isn't worth what it would cost you to lose it like that, in front of everyone who's already looking for a reason to say your fairness is a lie." He shrugged, awkward under her stare. "Beating you never mattered as much as I thought it would once I understood what it might take from you." She was quiet long enough that he began to worry he had said something wrong, offended some fighter's pride he did not understand the shape of. Then she said low, "In the arena, a thrown match was the worst insult a fighter could offer. It meant you thought your opponent too weak to earn a true win. This isn't the arena." "No," she agreed, and something in her voice had gone soft and unguarded in a way he had not heard from her before. "It is not, and I think that is the only reason I am not angry with you." She did not say thank you. She reached out instead, before he understood what she meant to do, and pressed 2 fingers briefly against the inside of his wrist, over the fastest beating pulse in his body, in a gesture he did not know the meaning of and did not need explained to feel the weight of. Then she turned and walked back into the fair before he could find any words at all, leaving him standing behind the hay bales with his rope-burned hands and his hammering heart and the growing, unmistakable certainty that he was in serious trouble. The trouble, when it finally found its shape, arrived on the smell of smoke. It was the season for it, when the hill farmers around Kestrel's Crossing burned off the dry heather and gorse before the autumn planting, and for 3 days the whole valley lay under a low haze that caught gold in the mornings and turned everything the color of old bronze by evening. William had grown up around that smell every year of his life and never thought twice about it, until the afternoon he was standing at the wellhead on the Danvers plot, checking a new pulley, and the wind shifted and brought him a gust of it thick and close, and something in him simply stopped working right. He did not remember deciding to sit down. He remembered the ground under him, gritty and real, and the smoke smell filling his skull with something that was not memory exactly but closer to weather, a pressure behind his eyes, a taste of ash on his tongue that had nothing to do with the hill fires burning half a mile off. He remembered a name trying to surface and refusing to come all the way up. Bagrat found him there an hour later, sent by Tomas Reeve, who had come looking for William about a contract, and found him instead sitting motionless by a half-finished well with his hands pressed flat against his knees and his eyes fixed on nothing. Yates. She crouched in front of him close enough that her presence cut through the haze like something solid to hold on to. William. It was the first time she had used his given name, and something in the sound of it, low and careful, pulled him partway back into himself. "The smoke," he said, which explained nothing and everything at once. She did not ask him to elaborate there, in front of Tomas and the half-curious drovers walking past. She simply stood, offered him her hand, and did not let go of it once he'd taken it, walking him back to the boarding house through streets thick with burn smell, saying nothing at all, which was somehow exactly the right thing to say. That evening, sitting on the boarding house step with 2 cups of Tomas's cheap wine that neither of them had touched, William finally said, "There was a valley, 5 years back. They called it Imberfall after." Bagrat went very still beside him. "I was conscripted out of Thornwell for the border flare," he said, the words coming slow and rusted, like a well-left cap too long. "I wasn't a soldier. I was a well-digger's apprentice with a sling and no idea what I was doing, and my cousin Edrin came with me because he wouldn't let me go alone. He taught me the trade since I was 12. He was the closest thing I had to a father after mine died." William. The valley caught fire on the second day of fighting. Oil pots, I think, though nobody was choosing where they landed by then. By the time the smoke started clearing, there wasn't much of a battle left, just ash and dying men and a heat coming up off the ground that felt like it would never stop. He stared at his own hands. "Edrin took a spear meant for me. I was trying to stop the bleeding when I understood there was nothing left to stop. And when I finally looked up from him, there was an orc woman standing in the smoke, and I remember thinking, quite clearly, that I did not have it in me to fight anymore, and that I did not much care if she killed me for it." He looked at her then and watched her face confirm what some deep unspoken part of him had already known since the moment he'd walked through the curtain of the wait-sworn office and felt a familiarity he couldn't name. "You didn't kill me," he said. "You knelt by Edrin though he was already gone, and then you gave me your water skin and you said something in your own tongue I didn't understand and you walked away." "Ashkavel," Bagrat said quietly. "Battle mercy. When the last 2 standing in a fight choose not to finish it, our law calls the killing done, whatever anyone else still wants from it. What I said was Tenzu Ashka. Your life is marked to mine." She turned her cup slowly in her hands, not drinking from it. "I did not choose you that day out of tenderness, William. I chose you because I looked at a boy sitting in the ash trying to hold his cousin's blood inside him with his own 2 hands, and I understood I had no fight left in me either, not for that, not against that. I walked toward you instead of away because there was nothing on the other side of walking away except more of the same. You've known this whole time, he said. Every letter. The stone reckoning, all of it. I have known since the first contract dispute crossed my table with your name on it. Carn Hold marks its Tenzu with more than memory, William. There was a witness that day, a scout of my own warband who lived long enough to report it to my elders before he died of his wounds a week later. It was recorded. When I saw your name, I did not have to search my memory to be certain. I only had to decide what to do about it. And what you decided, he said slowly, working it through, was to protect me for a year without telling me why. At first, she admitted, because the debt required it. I will not lie to you about that. Ashcaval is not a soft custom. It obligates the one who is spared to some measure of care for the one who spared them, and it obligates the one who spared them not to see that care wasted on someone unworthy of it. She finally looked up at him, and there was something almost defenseless in her expression, an honesty she did not seem to enjoy giving. But it has been many months since I have thought of you as an obligation, William Yates. I read your letters twice before I answered them. I worried twice, when you went a fortnight without writing, and told myself it was concern for a debt, and knew even then that I was lying to myself about it. Whatever began as duty stopped being only duty a long time before you ever walked into my office and asked me why. He set down his untouched cup and reached for her hand instead, the same hand that had once held a water skin out to a boy who had nothing left to offer in return, and found that she let him take it, and that her fingers, when they closed around his, were not steady either. I need you to know something too, then, he said. Something I've never told anyone. Not Tomas. Not my mother, God knows. I think about that day more than I've ever admitted, and it isn't only Edrin I think about. It's you. I've spent 5 years half convinced I dreamed the part where an orc warrior chose mercy over a killing stroke, because it didn't fit anything the rest of the world had taught me to expect. And some nights I still wake up smelling smoke, and I don't know whether I'm grieving him or looking for you. He exhaled, unsteady. You gave me a reason to get up out of that ash and walk home. I have never told a living soul that I nearly didn't. Bagrak did not say anything for a long moment. Then she leaned in, slow enough that he had every chance to stop her and did not want to, and pressed her mouth to his, gentle at first and then not, one hand coming up to rest against his jaw as though she needed to be certain he was real and warm and here, 5 years and 1 crossroads away from that burning field. He kissed her back with his whole chest aching, tasting salt he couldn't tell belonged to which of them, and when she finally drew back, she rested her forehead against his and laughed, low and shaken. I have wanted to do that, she said, since you handed me back a contract you had won fairly and told me you liked me better as an opponent than an enemy. I've wanted you to do that, he said, since you told me not to let your praise go to my head. Grosh Ironquill arrived at Kestrel's Crossing 4 days later, an old orc with a gray-streaked beard braided in the plain style of a Carn Hold elder, and he did not waste time on pleasantries. The Tenzu has stood 5 years unresolved, Bagrak Mudborn, he said, in the waitsworn office, with William standing awkwardly at Bagrak's shoulder and the young clerk pretending very hard not to listen from behind the front table. Carn Hold law gives a marked debt 5 years to close, one way or another, before the elders require it settled by the hold itself. You know this. I know it, Grosh. Then you know your choices. You may renounce the mark before witnesses and it ends, and the human owes you nothing and you owe him nothing, and this is finished. He glanced at William without warmth, not unkind, simply assessing. Or you may close it the old way in the ring if either of you believes there is still fight enough between you to settle it with blows. Ushna Kolskar has already suggested as much to anyone who will listen. And the third way, Bagrak said quietly. The third way requires both of you willing, spoken before a witness, that the mark becomes a bond kept rather than closed. It is not done lightly. It is rarer than the other two together, and it is not undone once made. Grosh's gaze moved between them, taking in the way William had not stepped back from her shoulder, the way Bagrak had not moved to put distance between herself and the human beside her. "The reckoning court sits in 6 days. I will need your answer before then," Waite sworn. He left without further ceremony, and the office felt very quiet after the door closed behind him. 6 days, William said. 6 days, Bagrak agreed, to decide whether I ask you to bind yourself to a debt you never asked for, or whether I let 5 years of my life end the same way it began, in a ring, with someone deciding to hurt me because it is easier than trusting me. "You're not asking me anything," William said. "I'm telling you. I already know what I want, Bagrak. I knew it behind the hay bales at the muster. I knew it before I understood why I felt like I already knew you the first time I walked through that curtain." He took her hand again, more certain this time than he had been even 2 nights before. "The only thing that frightens me about the reckoning court is not the Tenzu. It's Corvin Ash, and I don't think he's finished with us yet." He was right to be frightened of it, though not in the end, for the reason he expected. Corvin Ash filed his accusation with the reckoning court clerk 2 days later, and by the time the whole crossroads had heard the shape of it, it was clear he had been waiting for exactly this kind of leverage for a long while, patient as a man who has learned that grudges keep best when left to ripen. The accusation was simple, and on its surface, damning. That Bagrak Mudbourne, sworn Waitesworn of Kestrel's Crossing, had for the better part of a year used her office to protect the interests of William Yates, a human to whom she was bound by an old and undisclosed orc life debt, and that every ruling she had made in his favor over that time should therefore be considered void for bias, including the rulings that had cost Corvin Ash coin and reputation. He demanded her stripped of her Waitesworn sash, the disputed rulings reversed, and citing the old penalty codes both peoples still honored at the crossroads, that she forfeit the earnings of her office for the year as restitution for corrupted judgment. The town split along predictable lines within a day. Human traders who had themselves been caught out by Ash's light weights rallied loudly in Bagrak's defense in the market square, but plenty of others, uneasy for reasons they mostly kept vague, muttered that an orc judging human contracts had always been a strange arrangement, and perhaps this proved it. Among the Karn-hold folk, Ushna Kolskar took Ash's accusation as vindication of everything she had been saying for a year, that softness toward a human had rotted a good fighter's judgment, while others, including several drovers Bagrak had ruled for fairly over the seasons, defended her hotly at the trough lines and the tavern tables. Grosh Ironquill said nothing publicly at all, which worried William more than any of the shouting. "If they reverse your rulings," William said, 3 nights before the court, pacing the small room he'd taken above the boarding house while Bagrak sat with her arms crossed, watching him wear a groove in the floorboards, "it isn't only your name that suffers. It's every trader you've protected, my own contracts, half the small men on the southern road who have never had anyone check Ash's weights before you started doing it. I know what is at stake, William. I know you know. I'm thinking out loud." He stopped pacing. "The accusation only works if your rulings against Ash were about me and nothing else. If I can prove he was cheating people long before you and I ever exchanged a single letter, and that your rulings caught the same pattern of fraud in cases that have nothing to do with me at all, then the bias argument falls apart on its own weight. That will take evidence Ash has spent years hiding." "Then I'd better start digging," William said, and something in the grim, familiar set of his jaw made her almost smile despite everything. He spent the better part of 2 days and 1 sleepless night doing exactly that, calling in every favor his trade had ever earned him. He rode out to 3 outlying farms whose owners had grumbled for years about short grain measures from Ash's wagons, but never had the coin or standing to challenge a man of his position. He sat up past midnight with an old retired factor named Pruitt who had kept, out of pure spite after a falling out with Ash a decade back, a private set of calibrated weights. He used to secretly check every delivery that passed through his hands, and who handed over 5 years of careful, damning notes without needing to be asked twice. He found two other well-diggers who had been shorted on stone and rope deliveries, and had simply eaten the loss, because complaining to a man like Ash had never seemed worth the trouble. By the second dawn he had a stack of testimony and physical proof, mismatched trade weights, short-measured sample sacks, old witness staves with tallies that did not match Ash's own ledgers, that told a story going back a decade, one that had nothing to do with William Yates or any life debt at all. He laid it all out on Bagrak's table in the gray early light, exhausted, ink-stained, and she went through every page with the same careful, unhurried attention she gave any contract, occasionally looking up at him with an expression he was too tired to fully read. "This is not a well-digger's work," she said finally. "No," he agreed. "This is a man who spent a year learning how a waitsworn's office thinks, from very good letters and better company. I had a fine teacher." She reached across the table and covered his ink-stained hand with hers, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all, because there was nothing that needed saying that the gesture hadn't already covered. The reckoning court convened on a clear, cold morning in the long hall at the center of the crossroads square. Human town councilors seated along one bench, and Carn-hold elders along the other, Grosh Ironquill among them, with the crowded floor between them packed with every trader, drover, and idle onlooker the fair season had drawn to Kestrel's crossing. Corvin Ash stood near the front in his best coat, composed and confident, certain enough of his position that he had not bothered to bring more than a single ledger clerk to support him. He was considerably less composed an hour later. William laid his case out plainly, without theatrics, the way he'd learned from watching Bagrak work. Fact after fact, witness after witness, each one small and undeniable, building into something too heavy to argue with. Prewitt's private ledgers. The two well-diggers, red-faced with the shame of finally admitting they'd been cheated and too afraid to say so. The mismatched weights themselves, brought forward and set on a scale before the whole hall, proving in front of everyone's eyes what a decade of careful silence had hidden. When William finished, laying the last witness stave on the table before the councilors, the hall was not silent so much as electric, 100 quiet conversations breaking out at once as traders who had long suspected Ash's dealings found their suspicions finally given shape. "This does not touch the matter of bias," Ash said, too loudly, color rising in his face. "Whatever my past dealings, the waitsworn ruled in this man's favor, knowing herself bound to him by an old debt she never disclosed." "She ruled in his favor," William said, turning to face him directly, "because you were cheating him, the same way this evidence proves you cheated a dozen others who have nothing to do with any debt at all. Every ruling she made against you can be checked against your own true measures, which we've now shown to this whole hall. If her judgment was corrupted, Ash, it was corrupted toward the truth, and I'd like to see you argue that's a crime under any law this crossroads keeps." The human councilors conferred briefly, heads bent together, and it was the eldest of them, a stern gray-haired woman named Councilor Prisk, who delivered the finding. The accusation of bias was dismissed as unsupported by the evidence presented. Bagrak Mudbourne's rulings were upheld in full, and Corvin Ash, under the crossroads' old and well-remembered penalty for dishonest weights, would forfeit the whole season's stock currently in his warehouses, to be distributed among those he had defrauded, and would surrender his trading license at Kestrel's crossing for a period of no less than 3 years. Ash went white, then red, and was escorted out by 2 of the town's watchmen amid a murmur that was not quite a cheer, but came close enough to sting him on the way through the door. Bagrak found William's hand under the table before the hall had even finished emptying, and held it so tightly it nearly hurt. The second matter was handled quietly, after the crowd had thinned, in a side chamber off the main hall where Grosh Ironquill waited with 2 other elders and, unexpectedly, Ushna Kolskar standing near the wall with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "The Tenzu, then," Grosh said, once the door had closed. "You have your answer, waitsworn." Bagrak looked at William, and he understood that whatever came next was meant to be his to say as much as hers. "I've had my answer since before I understood what the mark even was," William said, before Bagrak could speak for him. "I didn't grow up with your customs, Elder Ironquill, and I won't pretend I understand all the weight this carries for your people, but I understand this much. 5 years ago, a woman I'd never met chose to spare my life, when every rule she'd been raised on told her not to. And she spent the better part of a year quietly making sure my living wasn't stolen out from under me by men who thought I was too small to defend myself. I'm not choosing her because I owe her. I stopped keeping that account a long time ago. I'm choosing her because she is the finest, fairest, most stubborn person I have ever known, and I would rather stand beside her at this crossroads for the rest of my life than walk away from her the way she once refused to walk away from me." Ushna Kolskar made a rough sound that might have been disbelief and might, William thought, have been something closer to reluctant respect. "And you, Bagrak Mudbourne?" Grosh asked. "I chose him on a burning field before I ever knew his name," Bagrak said, "and I have not once regretted it since, though I will admit it has cost me a good deal of arguing with Kolskar over the past year." A faint, dry glance toward the older orc, who snorted but did not argue the point. "I ask that the mark stand as a bond kept, not a debt closed. I want no more distance from him than there already is between any two people learning how to build a life together." Grosh studied them both for a long moment, then drew a plain witness stave from his coat, the same kind William had seen 100 times across a waitsworn's table, and notched it once cleanly with a small curved knife. "Then let it be witnessed," he said, "that the tenzu between William Yates of Thornwell and Bagrak Mudbourne of Carn Hold is closed not by renunciation nor by combat, but by willing bond, freely spoken on this day, before this witness." He held the stave out, and Bagrak took it, turning it once in her scarred fingers before passing it to William, who closed his hand around it feeling, absurdly, that he had just signed the most important contract of his life using every skill she had ever taught him to read one. Ushna Kolskar pushed off the wall as the elders filed out, pausing in front of them both with an expression that had softened, grudgingly, into something almost warm. "You threw a stone-reckoning match for her at the muster," she said to William, not quite a question. "I heard about that." "I did. Foolish," she said. "Also, I am told the correct thing to do." She looked at Bagrak. "I still think you have gone soft, Mudbourne. I no longer think it is a weakness." And with that, gruff and unceremonious, she was gone, leaving the two of them alone with a notched witness stave, and a future neither of them had planned for but both, it turned out, had been quietly building toward for a very long time. 2 weeks later, William stood at the wellhead of a new site on the northern edge of the crossroads, checking the pulley chain Bagrak had insisted on testing herself before he'd even finished setting it, because, as she'd informed him with perfect seriousness, a waitsworn did not sign her name to shoddy work, even her own households. "It's a pulley, not a contract," he said, watching her yank the chain twice more than necessary. "Everything is a contract, William. You have simply never had to write this one down." She let the chain fall and turned to him, brushing dust from her palms, brass tokens swinging against her jaw, the same as the first day he'd seen her, except that now she stepped in close enough to rest her forehead against his without either of them thinking twice about it. "We are opening a second office. Did I tell you?" "You did not tell me. You told the town council. I found out from Tomas, who found out from the clerk, who apparently finds out everything before I do." "The Southern Post is expanding its charter," she said, ignoring his complaint entirely, "to include a witnessed partnership for well contracts specifically, run jointly by the waitsworn's office and a certain well-digger of excellent reputation and occasionally excellent judgment." She tilted her head, considering him. "You will need a waitsworn's mark on your ledgers if you mean to service the whole caravan circuit next season, given how well the stone reckoning contract turned out for you despite your best efforts to lose it. You gave me a fair share of that contract out of guilt." I gave you a fair share of that contract, she corrected, because you are, against all evidence I once had for distrusting your kind, an honest man, and Carnhold Custom rewards honest men who happen to be building a life with a weight sworn. She kissed him then, unhurried in the plain daylight at the edge of an unfinished well, with no one left to hide it from and no reason left to want to. When she drew back, she was almost laughing. Also, I like watching you work. It is a poor excuse for a business partnership, but I find I do not much care. I threw an entire contract's worth of prize money at your feet for that view, William said, so I suppose it's only fair I get to enjoy it too. You threw the match because you loved me before either of us had the sense to say so, Bagrak said, and we are both going to keep pretending it was only about the crowd's opinion of orc arbiters, because it makes a better story at the tavern. It's a fine story either way. It is, she agreed, and reached for the pulley chain again, and this time let him catch her hand instead, lacing his rope-scarred fingers through hers, brass tokens and old battle scars, and 5 years of ash finally, quietly, resolved into something neither of them meant to spend the rest of their lives without.